inviting Lake Forest Open Lands to co-sponsor this timely seminar and presentation today. We are delighted. When I was asked to moderate this forum, I happened to pick up the Chicago Tribune. It was their January 21st issue, and lo and behold, one of the main articles in the front section was U.S. allows chemicals in food that other countries outlaw. And I thought, this looks timely. And so I picked it up and I want to read to you from that article. When Gatorade fan Sarah Kavanaugh learned that her favorite drink contains an emulsifier banned in other countries over health concerns, she was taken aback. This is a quote from Sarah, who is a 15-year-old student. She says, I was shocked that they put their consumers at risk like that and that the FDA would allow something like that to be put in products, said the Mississippi 15-year-old who launched a petition in November asking Gatorade to remove the ingredient called brominated vegetable oil, or BVO. The petition, which has attracted more than 200,000 supporters on change.org, notes that the ingredient shares an element, bromine, with some flame retardants used in furniture and plastics. Some studies on BVO indicate it can build up in fatty tissues and cause reproductive and behavioral problems in rodents. It's illegal to use the chemical as a food additive in the EU, in India, Nepal, Canada, Brazil, and Japan. Other ingredients that are allowed in American food, but not in other countries, include certain artificial flavors and additives to flour. Why the difference? And this is one of the things that we hopefully will be discussing as we go along. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration would not provide a representative for an interview, but in past statements to the media and on its website, the agency has presented a variety of reasons for allowing controversial chemicals in foods, ranging from a lack of resources for research to assurances that the substances are safe in small doses. But in the case of BVO, the agency has allowed interim use of it. I'm having a little trouble reading. Can we get a little more light up here? Let's see. Has allowed interim use of it since 1970, pending additional toxicological tests. Asked why it has not dealt with the interim in more than 40 years, the agency cited a need to maximize its resources and said addressing the issue is, quote, not a priority for the agency at this time. So that was the end of that article. Thank goodness there are 15-year-olds who are passing petitions on some of these issues. And I would like to share with you just for a moment some of the agencies who are responsible for oversight of food additives. The U.S. government agencies responsible for oversight of the products of agricultural biotechnology are the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Health and Human Services Food and Drug Administration, the FDA we're all familiar with. Depending on its characteristics, a product may be subject to review by one or more of these agencies, or apparently sometimes none of those various agencies. The USDA regulates through APHIS. In order to protect plant health, Bioregulatory Services implements the APHIS regulations for certain genetically engineered organisms that may pose a risk to plant health. So the USDA is focused on protecting plant health. The FDA is responsible for ensuring the safety and proper labeling of all food-derived foods and feeds, including those developed through bioengineering. Under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it is the responsibility of food and feed manufacturers to ensure that the products they market are safe and properly labeled. And before the passage of the Nutrition, Labeling, and Education Act in 1990, manufacturers provided nutritional information only on a voluntary basis, and it wasn't consistent from product to product. Many of us remember when that came into effect and we finally got some labeling on food products. The 1992 FDA Statement of Policy, Foods Derived from New Plant Varieties, clarified and provided guidance to the industry on scientific and regulatory issues and applied it to all food derived from all new plant varieties, including bioengineered food. And then based upon the agency's current knowledge, examples of substances that fall under FDA's authority include substances intended to enhance the plant's resistance to chemical herbicides, and also substances intended to alter the flavor or the texture of food. And similarly, based upon the agency's current knowledge of new plant varieties being developed using the new technologies of gene transfer, the EPA is in the process of evaluating how or if it will exert its oversight for the following examples, subject to its jurisdiction under FIFRA and therefore not under FDA's jurisdiction. And those are substances that are intended to kill insects and substances intended to protect plants from viral, fungal, or bacterial infections, and also substances that are plant regulators and thus pesticides. And finally, the EPA regulates the sale, distribution, and use of pesticides in order to protect our health and the environment, regardless of how the pesticide was made or its mode of action. The Biopesticides and Pollution Prevention Division of the Office of Pesticide Programs under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act regulates the distribution, sale, use, and testing of pesticide substances produced in plants and microbes. So you can see the point of all of this is that there are various federal agencies who are responsible for oversight, so there are possibilities that things may fall through the cracks from time to time. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers today, and we are absolutely delighted that one of them is Bill Kurtis, who almost needs no introduction in our area of Illinois. He has been an American television journalist, a producer, a narrator, and of course a news anchor. He was born in Pensacola, Florida, and for more than 40 years he has experience as an award-winning journalist. Growing up in Independence, Kansas, he studied journalism at the University of Kansas. After earning his degree, Mr. Kurtis decided to go to law school at Washburn University. At the start of his career, Mr. Kurtis worked for a television station in Topeka, Kansas, before moving to Chicago in 1966 to work for WBBM-TV. In 1970, he joined the staff of a CBS station in Los Angeles and soon had his first taste of national news, serving as a contributor to CBS Reports. He returned to Chicago in '73 to become a news anchor at his old station. During this time, he won several awards for his reporting. Kurtis covered the war in Vietnam, including the fall of Saigon, and he created a documentary about the city. In '82, Mr. Kurtis joined the national program of CBS Morning News as a co-host. Since 2005, Mr. Kurtis has become heavily involved in raising and marketing grass-fed beef after he purchased 8,000 acres on a ranch near Seaton, Kansas. While looking for innovative uses for his ranch, Kurtis learned about the health and environmental benefits of grass-fed beef, and he founded Tallgrass Beef Company. He is also an investor in the Prairie Grass Cafe in Northbrook, Illinois. Some of us may have had the pleasure of eating there. And our other panelist is Dr. Gupta. She is an associate professor of pediatrics at Northwestern University's School of Medicine. She graduated from the Feinberg School of Medicine there with a joint appointment to Northwestern University's Institute for Healthcare Studies and the Smith Child Health Research Program at Children's Memorial Hospital. She is also on the board of directors of the Chicago Asthma Consortium and the steering committee of the Alliance for Research in Chicagoland Communities. Dr. Gupta received a BS in biology and an MD from the University of Louisville, where she was awarded the Guaranteed Entrance to Medical School Scholarship. That sounds like a handy thing to have. She completed her residency at the University of Seattle and was honored with the Fitzhugh Mullen Resident Leadership Award, the American Medical Association's National Leadership Award. Following her residency, Dr. Gupta entered the National Research Service Award Pediatric Health Service Research Fellowship at Children's Hospital in Boston, where she received her master's in public health from the Harvard School of Public Health and Medicine, and where she is currently on the faculty. She is currently on the faculty at Northwestern University. Dr. Gupta's research interests include childhood asthma and food allergy. She recently published a book, The Food Allergy Experience, Real Voices, Real Disease, Real Insights. We would like to welcome both of our panelists this evening. And before we get started, I've also been asked to remind everyone to turn off their cell phones. And our speakers will be giving a presentation, and then after the presentation, if you will be raising your hands, and we will pass around note cards and pencils, for questions to the panelists. So I've taken plenty of time, and so I would like to introduce Mr. Kurtis. Let's give a round of applause.
Well, after your introduction about GMOs, I usually entitle this presentation Death by Food, but I'm going to change it to the story of a struggle to bring a food product to the American marketplace that has no chemicals and no additives, pure, without chemicals. So I think you'll find it an adventure. But for those of you who are not familiar with me, my broadcasting career has spanned 40, closing in on 50 years. But it's not all been serious journalism, although it's been highlighted primarily by serious documentaries like this. There was a time before cable, when the local anchorman reigned supreme. When people believed everything they heard on TV. This was an age when only men were allowed to read the news. And in San Diego, one anchorman was more man than the rest. His name was Ron Burgundy. Oh, I love those shoes. You can pull down the lights a little bit. Ron Burgundy was not exactly Edward R. Murrow, but he was a lot more fun. For me, it led to this and this. As I say, we usually shoot these at night. Undefeated professional boxer Floyd "Money" Mayweather has the fastest hands boxing has ever seen. So I've come to this ring to see who's faster on the internet. I'll be using the 3G AT&T laptop connect card. He won't. So I can browse the web faster, email business plans faster, all on the go. I'm Bill Kurtis, and I'm faster than Floyd Mayweather. In reality, most of you may be more familiar with Channel 2 News, Walter Jacobson, and this part of my television work. Investigative reporting is the role that I would like to assume today, returning to my serious side, because I found a story that may be the most important of my career, and certainly it will be yours. In cold case files, we usually start with a body. In this case, we have multiple bodies. Our crime scene will be all over the United States. Cause of death, obesity. That's 400,000 dead every year in America and rising. According to the CDC, it's become the #2 most preventable killer of Americans. What is #1? Tobacco. It kills 435,000, but obesity is catching up. We say preventable because all you have to do to stop is stop smoking. In the 20th century, tobacco was the scourge. In the 21st century, sorry, but we're fat. We do not exercise, and that is a bad combination. We know that smoking was killing us, but it's hard to stop because nicotine in cigarettes is addictive. And we know obesity will kill us, but it's hard to stop eating. Could it be that food is addictive too? Maybe something they put in the food. When cops investigate a homicide, they look for motive, means, and opportunity. Let's do that here and see if we can find a smoking gun. Let's look first for the means, because it's the easiest. That would be our diet. Technically, it's called the Western diet. You recognize it at one time or another. We've all felt like we've eaten the whole thing. How do you recognize an old hippie? He used to take acid. Now he takes antacid. Back to our homicide investigation. Why is our diet implicated? Dr. Loren Cordain of Colorado State University comes closest to an answer, in my opinion. He wrote a book called The Paleo Diet. With 7 of his colleagues, he studied the diet of early man, back before the age of agriculture, back beyond the 10,000 years when it started, back to about 150,000 years, by studying the fossil on his bones. And he found that early man, and I can only presume that early woman, consisted of a diet of roots and nuts and berries and lean wild game that grazed on grass and forage. So he concluded that we are programmed for a high-protein diet of lean meat, nuts, berries, and roots. But over hundreds of thousands of years, our diet changed. Specifically, during the last 60 years, causing Dr. Cordain to conclude that diet-related chronic diseases are the largest cause of death that we have. They're epidemic in westernized populations, afflicting between 50 and 65% of the population, and yet you don't find the same problem in less westernized countries, the hunter-gatherer countries. So what is it about the Western diet that kills us? In his scientific language, Dr. Cordain says, it is a complex interaction between, directly linked to the excessive consumption of industrial area foods, dairy products, cereals, refined sugars, refined vegetable oils, fatty meat, salt, and combination of these foods. I told you the means was the easiest to establish, all from an unassuming little package designed by marketers who are getting paid millions of dollars to make you want it. In terms of the homicide, we'll call it a kill weapon that you use every day, in my case, many times a day. Means, motive, and opportunity. So if means is what we eat, then opportunity is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And a Cinnabon in the airport, white chocolate mocha, buffalo wings while we watch the Bears, you know the drill. But what about motive? Is it possible that someone would deliberately create a food product with no value other than to get you to buy it? A product valued more for its shelf life than nutrition. And we exchanged life for shelf life. To make my case, I'd like to lay a foundation, a context for understanding how our food supply has turned upside down. Gone are the days when Grandma wrung a chicken's neck and picked the green beans herself. The story of America's love affair with beef begins after the Civil War, when the great cattle drives started up from Texas. They were heading to Kansas.
Why not turn west of the red and head up for Kansas?
Well, Kansas, he says. Fine howdy man, I'd be heading for Kansas when the railroad's in Missouri.
Railroad in Kansas, too.
Where?
I saw one in Topeka, there's one in Abilene.
That's further west.
The story of Abilene and the trail drives going to Kansas is our United States story. Southern soldiers who had lost their fortunes in the Civil War started driving cattle up the Chisholm Trail. They would fatten them on the way, and when they got to Kansas, on the lush grasses of the Flint Hills, before putting them on the railroad cars to come here and build Chicago. Between 1867 and 1874, 3 million head of cattle were shipped to Chicago. The livestock yards became the biggest in the world. As an industry, it wouldn't change much from 1900 to World War II. You fed cows grass for 24 months and then shipped them off to the stockyards to be harvested by Chicago meat packers. Sometimes I catch myself dreaming of those oceans of grass and sky, and I picture myself as John Wayne saying,
This is it. This is where we start growing good beef. Sure looks good, Tom. We've come 2,000 miles with everything a man could want. Good water and grass. Plenty of it. Who does it belong to? To me.
yeah, to me. I wish. When I wake up and realize, hey, I'm in the wrong century. Back then, it was a cowboy and a horse. Today, well, around World War II, something really big happened to America's beef industry. It ran into corn. Now, we don't know as much about corn's relationship with humans as the cow. The age of agriculture started only 10,000 years ago, but it's just as impressive. Corn is a grass, a monster grass that grows up to 10 feet tall. In Illinois alone, 1 million acres of prairie grass has been replaced by corn. I'm sorry, lake forests, open lands. 80 million acres in the whole country is now in corn. From the cities of stone left behind by the Mayans and Aztecs and Incas, it's clear that they worshipped maize or corn. To them, the universe was represented by a giant corn plant. Human sacrifices to the gods were needed to keep the balance of the universe in order. It was a corn culture. And except for the human sacrifice, we're much the same today. Corn relates directly to the crime of obesity. Let's use it to build a timeline. Many crimes have innocent beginnings. It's often the unintended consequences that sneak up on us. A lot of people don't realize it, but our extra pounds got their start way back here during the Great Depression. The other one. We plowed up every acre we could find to plant corn and wheat, primarily in the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma, out west in Kansas, leaving the topsoil to blow away, especially in the driest part of the country. One of Franklin Roosevelt's goals in the New Deal was to save family farms. So they established some federal programs to subsidize 5 basic crops: wheat, corn, cotton, sugar, and soybeans. If the market fell below the cost of production, the government made up the difference to save the family farms. And it worked. At least we kept eating. That was 1933. The programs were intended to stop once the economy improved, but stopping government money is like trying to stop a river. Federal farm subsidies are still flowing today. You know, history doesn't happen conveniently like chapters in a book. It's more like an NFL season with lots of games. Then at the end you have a Super Bowl and you declare a winner. There were 2 other things that were percolating at the same time that would allow corn to become king of America and change everything around us. One of those things was hybrid corn. Now, you have seen the fields as you drive through the Midwest, the familiar signs. Hybrid corn was one of the great American inventions, the kind that made us think that we could do anything. It allowed us to fight pests and climate and increase the yield. Many people think that hybrid corn saved Europe from starvation after World War II. But increasing the yield would be both a salvation and a bargain with the devil. Before I tell you how, let me introduce the third element that made corn king. For 10,000 years, we could only grow what the land would allow. In 1920, that was about 20 bushels an acre, about the same as what the Hopi Indians planted and produced year after year in their sacred cornfields. We were limited to 20 bushels an acre because of nitrogen. About 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen, and the plants needed to grow every plant. There's only so much of it in an acre of land. Farmers eventually learned to increase the levels of reactive nitrogen in their soil by using plants called nitrogen-fixing plants with certain bacteria. But their resources were limited to just a few plants, legumes like alfalfa, and peas, and beans. And then in 1918, a German scientist, Fritz Haber, discovered a way to convert nitrogen gas in the air into a product that we could use to help plants grow. It was called ammonium nitrate, the basis of nitrogen fertilizer. Solved an age-old fear. What if the world's population gets bigger than our ability to feed it? Nitrogen fertilizer is the answer. That acre of land that produced 20 bushels back in 1920 can produce 200 bushels today. Nitrogen fertilizer turned America into a corn nation, or helped. It increased the yield and probably helped grow the world's population from 1.5 billion to 7 billion during today, 6 billion during the 20th century. So, put all three developments together, nitrogen fertilizer, hybrid corn, and New Deal subsidies, and you have a perfect storm that helped win World War II. And you know what happened after that. We bought into a chemical future, an industrial future. We escalated into the greatest standard of living in history. The Depression was over. Good times were here. A home in the suburbs with everyone. Everybody had a car. All this required a new infrastructure, new highways and washers and dryers and rock and roll. We had a good time until we began to see that there was a price to pay. Nitrogen oxide from the fertilizers becomes a greenhouse gas and destroys the ozone layer. Too many nitrates in drinking water cause cancer. I did a documentary on the pristine springs of Florida, purest waters in America and maybe the world, and one day the most valuable thing on earth. Just one day's flow of 80,000 gallons could supply all of Chicago's needs for a day. We found cancer-causing nitrates here, nearing dangerous levels. The source was dairy farms and agricultural fields about 20 miles north of the spring where the river went underground. But it sure was fun to see what a river looks like when it's clear enough to see beneath the surface. The same thing is happening when the nitrates in fertilizers run off the fields into the Mississippi River that carries them down to the Gulf of Mexico. This is called a dead zone, where the nitrates cause the algae to grow and suck the oxygen out of the water, leaving a desert at the mouth of the river. Some scientists predict that a ring of dead zones will stretch around the continent, all caused by agriculture runoff. It's almost laughable to talk about a dead zone caused by nitrogen fertilizer when you've got a really big dead zone created by an oil spill in the Gulf. At least this is an easy one to see. Hopefully it won't wrap around the entire Gulf Coast shoreline. With those images in mind, I want you to consider another kind of dead zone being deliberately created by what we're putting in our soils. I call it a scorched earth policy. Richard Mulvaney of the University of Illinois found what many have worried about for a long time, that the nitrogen fertilizers that we are spreading over 85 million acres of corn, and we won't count everything else we use it on, because the tiny organisms in the soil, the things that give the prairie soil its richness, the nitrogen fertilizer causes them to grow too fast and die. Year after year, tanks of nitrogen fertilizer spread 150 pounds of it on every acre to increase the yield. Without the chemicals, we'd look like the Hopi Indians. Now, we could unscorch it, but we'd have to limit our fertilizer to what the land could handle. And we'd have to abandon our search for a record yield every year. So when the perfect storm of yields came together during World War II, we had so much corn, we didn't have any place to put it. By railroads, alongside the silos and elevators, they had to do something with it because nobody wanted to throw it away. Corn needed a new market. And the traditional method of raising beef seemed to be it. It was prime for a change. One way to get rid of the corn was to feed it to the cattle. It was cheap. Government subsidies kept the price low. When the cattle ate corn, they fattened up almost twice as fast as on grass. And since ranchers are paid by the weight, faster the gain, faster they get paid. There was also more fat. Intramuscular marbling, as it was called by clever marketers. Now, more fat, it doesn't sound very appealing. Marbling does. And of course, we had more corn than any other place in the world. By 1950, agribusiness was changing the beef industry by moving cattle off the pastures and into giant paddocks or corrals. Paul Engler was a Texan who had a better idea. Why not build a really big lot where he could feed hundreds or thousands of cattle at one time? He had the corn. He now has 4 lots that can handle 250,000 cattle a day. It turned out that he could get the cattle, not by thousands, but hundreds of thousands. This is a feedlot in Garden City, Kansas. Population 50,000 head. Paul's cactus feeders are bigger. Smaller ranchers sell them to this feedlot when they're about a year old to be fed lots of grain, corn, by a single driver you will see driving along. Paul Engler was one of America's great entrepreneurs, and he would inspire the beef industry to turn itself upside down, replacing grass with this corn. Even he couldn't see what was about to come. In this industrial model, animals are hardly regarded as living things. They are commodities to be tampered with. Mother Nature, who worked millions of years on a perfect solar machine to turn plants into a protein in a sustainable circle, was now living out its life kicking through manure on bare ground. Do we see one single blade of grass for 6 months where those animals live? But once we entered the industrial model, the corporation sought new ways to maximize profit. If a diet of corn for 6 months could speed up the fattening process from 24 months down to 16 months, why not speed that up? Growth hormones, anabolic steroids were administered at birth or in the feed. They still are in the United States and Canada. But in Europe, they are banned. And so U.S. cattle, administered hormones, are banned from sale in the European Union because their scientific committees believe that hormones affect young girls in early puberty and pregnant women. I would venture to say that most mothers would agree with Europe. In fact, the Breast Cancer Fund says that girls today get their first periods, on average, earlier than girls did 40 years ago, but they get their breasts 1 to 2 years earlier. Over the course of a few decades, the childhoods of U.S. girls have been significantly shortened. And the problem is that the earlier puberty comes, the sooner the risk of breast cancer. I've been giving this talk, this presentation for a number of years, and over the course of the years, the average age of puberty has gone from the early teens to 9 to 7. That's set by the FDA. Now, I want to point out that the U.S. Department of Agriculture's position is that there is no established position between artificial hormones in livestock and puberty. That means they don't have the science to connect them all the way through. Other people do, but the USDA has not gotten off its position. So you be the judge. Google it. You'll find 500,000 hits, papers, research, and that's what this speech is all about. Look it up. In addition to that controversy, some other problems began to surface. They came from a change of diet from grass to corn and from the feedlot conditions. Respiratory illness came from breathing in the manure dust, feedlot polio, coccidiosis, abscessed livers, and more. They were so serious that cattle needed medication to keep them alive long enough to harvest. The use of antibiotics became routine. In fact, 70% of all the antibiotics we manufacture in the United States now treat livestock. I'm going to say that again, because that's your take home for today. 70% of all the antibiotics we manufacture in the United States for us go to treat livestock. Scientists are now warning that feedlots are creating strains of bacteria that are resistant to those antibiotics. You may have heard of a staph infection working its way through hospitals that is deadly and resistant to known antibiotics. You've heard of MRSA. Its origins have been traced to feedlots in Canada and the Netherlands. First report of MRSA, the scientists go right back, CDC, to the nearest feedlot. Could it be that our feedlots are petri dishes for growing new strains of antibiotic-resistant bacteria? A lot of people think so, including the FDA. And they have now issued voluntary restrictions on the use of subtherapeutic, in other words, growth uses of antibiotics, because there is something about antibiotics that causes them to gain weight. They want to stop that. Another one, which I'm sure that you have heard of, is E. coli, 0157. There's a recall every week. It is the scourge of the cattle industry, and it is found mostly in feedlots. It comes from changing the diet from grass to corn. And here's how it works. Over hundreds of thousands of years, grazing animals developed a unique way to process grass. You start with a large extra chamber called the rumen, where the grass is first broken down. The agents of digestion are microbes. They attack the grass's tough cell walls, releasing sugars and vitamins. But this is only the first stage. Partly digested grasses are then pumped from the first stomach back up to the mouth. We've heard of chewing the cud. And that speeds up the next stage, which takes place in the third stomach. Here, the grassy broth feeds bacteria that multiply quickly and dramatically. Just look at it, you kid. Finally, the contents move to the last chamber, which is the true stomach, and this is where the final digestion takes place. By now, the animal is not only digesting grass, it's digesting a huge or high-protein diet of bacteria. So when you replace the grass with corn, you have a different bacteria that is required. It's like putting diesel fuel in your car. It's more acidic, which in turn spawns a new bacteria, now that is able to make it past the cow's stomach acid and past our stomach acid to kill us. We better have antibiotics. The ranchers and packers didn't know what would happen when they started feeding so much corn. It was a model too good to be true, and it was. Now they have to pay attention. July 14th, 2009, the Obama administration started this movement. They took steps to ban many of the routine uses in the farm animals and stop the spread of dangerous bacteria in humans. Legislation was introduced in the House. 350 health and agricultural organizations supported it. It is not passed yet, but as I said, the FDA has imposed a request for voluntary restrictions on its use. There is one thing that we can do about it. The industry, not wanting to give up corn, is also spending millions to use irradiation on meat, chilling and steaming of the carcass during slaughter. But those things try to kill E. coli after it's been created. Why not avoid it in the first place? There's a study by James Russell of Cornell that found if processors stopped feeding corn only 5 days before slaughter, it could reduce the risk of E. coli by 80%. Now, in reality, that's easier said than done, but isn't it? Hello, isn't it worth studying? And of course, the most drastic measure. We could just put them back in the pasture where they belong, and all the problems would go away. It's called a grass-fed mud. Won't be easy, hasn't been easy for me. I sometimes feel like John Wayne.
There they are, man. 14 years of hard work. They say we can't make the drive. Think if you're wrong, better.
Yeah, they better be wrong. Here in 2013, 3 of every 5 Americans is overweight. 1 of every 5 is obese. For a long time, our weight in America was relatively stable. But in 1988, the CDC reported a remarkable change. It came from one of those giant government surveys. Dr. David Kessler, in his book, The End of Overeating, writes about it. He said Americans were gaining weight from 1988.
There they are, man. 14 years of hard work. They say we can't make the drive. Think if you're wrong, better.
You get them started and they won't let you go. They just keep coming back. Americans were gaining weight from 81 to 91. 1/3 of the population, ages 20 to 74, weighed too much. In fewer than a dozen years, 8% more Americans, about 20 million people, roughly the population of New York, had joined the ranks of the overweight. The study was published in JAMA, the American Medical Association's magazine. They said it revealed dramatic increases in all gender groups. For some reason, the rate of obesity had exploded. You'd be interested in this. In 1960, women from 20 to 29 averaged 128 pounds. By 2000, they averaged 157 pounds. In the 40 to 49 group, they went from 142 to 169 in 2000. And those already overweight were gaining more weight. A new type of disease associated just with obesity popped up. Diabetes 2. It's like the original, but it was renamed because it's occurring so frequently in children. There are about 24 million people with the disease today. A recent CDC report estimates that by 2050, 1 in 3 Americans will have diabetes 2. One disease alone could bankrupt our healthcare system. It is responsible for the statement that this generation of children will be the first not to outlive their parents. It's as if a distant relative came to visit, and after eating a Western diet for a month, suddenly looked just like us. Why are we eating ourselves to death? We've reduced manual labor to remote control. We've supersized our portions so the additional calories that we are consuming contain mostly corn in junk food, fast food, steakhouses, and a culture that promotes out-of-home eating. But the cleverest use of what we do with the intense sweetener, invented in 1957 by Archer Daniels Midland, right in Illinois. It's called high fructose corn syrup. 1/4 of the 45,000 items in the average supermarket have high fructose corn syrup. In 32 ounces of Big Gulp, there are 86 grams of corn syrup, the equivalent of 7 tablespoons of sugar. It's there for a very specific reason. You see, we human beings are vulnerable to an exploitation of our sweet tooth because we are predisposed to high energy foods. Back in the days when we were standing up in the savannah, we didn't know where our next meal was coming. We had to be ready. Hunting and gathering was hard work, so we needed quick energy. Sugars and fats offer the most energy, and also the most calories. Knowing our vulnerability, the manufacturers have bulked up the sweetness in processed food, so we'll drink more, buy more, and high fructose corn syrup is the enabler ingredient. Let's get down to business. If obesity is the crime, why did 400,000 of us eat ourselves to death? Were they just little pigs without willpower? Or was it because our culture has become junk food and they were programmed to eat, just like the cattle in those feedlots? Let's try to answer with our timeline. By 1956, most of the excess corn was going to livestock and those feedlots. Now we have a problem. America's herd grew from 36 million head to over 90 million. You could eat in your car. It was served fast by a clean, uniformed crew members at a low price, all made possible by cheap corn. Today, McDonald's alone uses 1 billion pounds of hamburger. And that doesn't count Burger King and Wendy's and Outburger and Steak and Shake and their clones. The hamburger is America's #1 protein source. Problem is, most of it is corn. Michael Pollan, the genre-founding author of Omnivore's Dilemma, a book that you should read, whose investigative reporting started a revolution toward healthy eating. Ask a biologist friend of his, Todd Dawson at Berkeley, to run a mass spectrometer to measure how much carbon in the menu items came from corn. Well, soda is 100% corn. Milkshake, 78%. Salad dressing, 65%. Chicken nuggets, 56%. Cheeseburger, about 52%. French fries, strangely, 25%. You see, we are children of the corn. And a lot of it comes from the high fructose corn syrup. Now we're getting somewhere with regard to our motive. It's the most valuable food product made from corn, among hundreds, incidentally, ranging from paint stabilizer to take the paint off fuselages to ethanol. All comes from the process of breaking down the kernel of corn that is mostly starch and sugar. When it comes to our Western diet, that processing takes nutrition out and puts high fructose corn syrup in. That is processed food. It's no secret that in the food industry, higher sugar, fat, and salt make you want to eat more. Sometime, I just want to say, unfortunately, we can't get out of the way. We are being stampeded, and here are a few examples. The venerable potato skin. The potato is hollowed out, the skin is fried, which creates a surface area for fat pickup. Add a combination of bacon bits, sour cream, and cheese, and you have fat on fat on fat with lots of salt. How about some cheese fries? A high-fat food with more fat on top of it. The carbohydrates break down to sugar in the body, and that causes you to gain weight. And meat. Buffalo wings. Start with the fatty parts of the chicken and deep fry. Serve them in sweet dipping sauce that's heavily salted. They're usually part fried at the plant, then fried again at a restaurant, which doubles the fat. So we have sugar, on salt, on fat, on fat, on fat. Spinach dip, anybody? Chicken tenders, white chocolate mocha, creamy salad dressing. One food consultant calls them fat with a little lettuce. The Western diet is an excuse to carry fat, salt, and sugar. Dr. Kessler quotes a food consultant as telling him the food industry is the manipulator of the consumer's minds and desires. Well, I think we have motive, means, and opportunity for the crime of obesity, but what are we going to do about it? I discovered the problems I've outlined about 7 years ago on my ranch in Kansas. I grew up there and I wanted to preserve grassland and do something sustainable on it. So I started a cattle herd and I ran right into the beef commodity system. I listed all the problems that I have talked to you about, and then I found that some people were raising cattle the old-fashioned way, on grass alone, never leaving the pasture. And almost miraculously, all the problems went away. Without growth hormones, we have no controversy over early puberty. Without administering antibiotics, we have no resistant bacteria. Without grain, we're gluten-free. Without a feedlot, we have no abscessed livers, acidosis, no bloating, no E. coli. And without concentrated waste, our cattle fertilize next year's crop of grass. It's a good start, but there's more. As Michael Pollan points out in Omnivore's Dilemma, pasture-raised, grass-fed animals actually become a health food. They're lower in calories, fat, and cholesterol than corn-fed cattle. The fat is polyunsaturated, unlike the feedlot cattle where corn creates saturated fat, the kind that causes heart problems and gives red meat a bad name. Grass-fed animals are higher in omega-3s, essential fatty acid, vitamin E, and CLAs, a new discovery thought to be a cancer fighter and a help for weight loss. It all comes from raising cattle the way nature intended, on grass where they belong. Why haven't we done it before? You need pastures. Many have turned into cornfields. In the past, the taste was often gamey. You can't put any old cow out there on grass and expect a miracle. We go to great lengths to find the right cattle for grass feeding. We find that they're the early English and Scottish breeds like Aberdeen Angus and Red Devon. Here's how we select every one of our animals. We put our 900-pound calf in a squeeze chute. This is where Temple Grandin got her idea for a squeeze chute for autistic children. Our COO is putting an ultrasound, one between the 11th and the 12th rib. We're getting a readout on a computer of a living ribeye muscle. And this is where we apply software with 25 points of measurement to find those cattle with the right qualifications to be tallgrass beef. That is a living ribeye stick right there on the hoof. In addition, we can trace every one of our animals back to the herd and the pasture it came from. Our service is called Identigen, and it uses DNA from every animal we have. You can see that sometimes it pays to have a cold case background. We don't have corn subsidies to give us a cheap source of feed, so our meat is a little more expensive. But it's good for the environment, good for family farmers, good for our health, and good for our families, who are raised the way nature intended. We're not going to replace 90 million head of beef cattle, but we'll provide a good alternative for those of you who want healthier beef. There is something in the air. It's a movement to change our food supply. Just as tobacco was the cause of the 20th century problems, food will be the test for this generation. Hasn't been easy for tallgrass beef. We came to Chicago with no antibiotics, had no hormones, and no market. We had to educate everybody in order to sell. We had to raise capital when no banks were lending. We had to stare down a recession to grow and fight the government and regulations. And we had to convince the industry that we deserve a place where beef can be beef again. And I've often said, if it's the last thing I do,
I'll have that brand on enough beef to feed the whole country. Good, hungry people. Beef to make them strong, make them grow. It takes work, but It takes sweat. It takes time. Lots of time. It takes years.
So saddle up, Pilgrim. Now you know the truth, and it's time for you to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sure I express gratitude for the entire audience. Thank you. Dr. Gupta, we await your presentation. Thank you.
I think this is one of the hardest acts to follow I've ever had. Oh my God, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Very educational. So I will do my best. I'll try to keep it short, maybe that'll help as soon as we get the computer up and running. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit more about food allergies in the United States. That's what I primarily do my research on. As you heard, I'm a physician and a researcher at Northwestern and at Lurie Children's Hospital. I study asthma, I study food allergies, but I'm really interested in the causes of why we have the increase that we do today. And this opportunity today is giving me a great chance to actually do a little bit more research and understand it better. And I concur 100% with everything Bill Kurtis was saying. And as soon as this, perfect. All right. One of the, as I go around talking about food allergies, I can talk about some of my slides without you having to see them. As I go around talking about food allergies, the number one question I get asked is why. Why do we see the large increase that we see today? And that's something that, well, now you'll have to wait and find out. Here we go. Oh, it's this one? All right, so I'm going to talk a lot about the research we're doing currently at Northwestern. And there we go. And we'll start with prevalence. So food allergies. I don't know how many people, can we show hands? Do you have a kid with food allergy or have a food allergy yourself or know someone with a food allergy? How many people? Okay. So that's huge. That's exactly the point. Food allergy is increasing in prevalence. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'll do the story. I like the story. So I came to Chicago about 7 years ago studying asthma. I studied asthma in Boston. And there is a family here that you may or may not know, Dave and Denise Bunning, who are huge advocates of food allergy. And they, along with the Food Allergy Initiative, were starting a study at Northwestern, at Lurie Children's, on food allergy. And I had just come here and I was really interested in what they were doing. And food allergy, although it's not asthma, it's in the spectrum. So there's a spectrum, it's called atopy. We'll do a little medical learning. So it's atopy. It consists of three things. It's eczema, or atopic derm, right? The itchy skins, the patches. And then it goes on the march. It starts with eczema and then the march goes on to allergies. And those allergies can be environmental allergies or food allergies. So then it keeps going, and a lot of times those same children develop asthma. So it's a group of those three chronic conditions that kind of run together. And it doesn't mean you have to have all three. A lot of people only have one, some have two, and many have three. Your chances are increased if you have one of having more. So why they run together is they're all immune mediated, meaning your immune system is causing it. So your immune system is kind of causing the eczema. Your immune system is fighting things it shouldn't be fighting when you have environmental allergies or when you have food allergies. And same with asthma. So they kind of run together in that immune-mediated spectrum of disease. So although food allergy was not asthma, it was very interesting to me, and when I started studying it, what really took me by surprise was that food allergies, we didn't have near the amount of research we did in asthma. So in asthma, there's a lot of literature out there. We know a lot about asthma. We knew almost nothing about food allergy, to the point that we didn't even know how many people suffered from food allergy. So we started out by doing a study. We surveyed 40,000 families across the United States. And they were households with children. I'm a pediatrician, I practice pediatrics, so we were really looking at the prevalence in children. And so we surveyed households. They had to have at least one child. We asked, how many children do you have? So you said 4. Okay, for the next couple of questions, I want you to only talk about child number 2. So we were really doing a study only on the children of the United States. So 40,000 US households, and the prevalence of food allergy we found, our big finding, was that 8% of these kids had food allergy. That's a lot of kids. That is 1 in 13 kids. That's 2 in almost every classroom. That is about 6 million kids in the United States. So that was a big number, it was a big finding, and I think it was great to finally have a number to go out and talk about food allergy, that this is a big problem in the United States today. Also, we found that of the children with food allergy, 30% of them were allergic to more than one food. So these kids were avoiding not only eggs, but eggs, milks, peanuts, soy. Also, of those with food allergy, 39% of them had experienced a severe reaction. So a severe, life-threatening reaction. 40% of them had already experienced this. Okay, so of the foods that children were most allergic to, the top graph shows them to you. It's peanut, milk, shellfish, tree nut, egg, finfish, wheat, and soy. And those are the percentages. So, for example, for peanut, 1 in 4 kids in our sample who had a food allergy had a peanut allergy. That was followed by milk, surprisingly, at 21%. Shellfish, tree nut, egg, finfish, wheat, and soy. And then the severity. So these are, the kids who had had a severe allergic reaction. So 50% of kids who had a peanut allergy had already experienced a severe life-threatening reaction. Tree nut, 52. Shellfish, 46. 40 for finfish. But you can see even things like milk, 31%. Now this is by age group. So interestingly, peanut, you can see, is pretty consistent across the age groups. Somewhere between 20 and 28%. Shellfish, we tend to see that at a later age, and typically that's because a lot of kids don't try shellfish until they're older. Tree nuts, similar. Milk and egg are the 2 that we see most frequently at a younger age group. So kids get these allergies early, and it used to be thought that they would grow out of them or develop tolerance to these allergies as they grew up. Now we still see that for egg. Egg, you can see it really nicely decreasing. So a lot of kids with egg allergies do develop tolerance, do grow out of it, and can safely eat it. However, milk, we found the same for milk. And what we've noticed is more and more older kids are holding on to their milk allergy. And then you can see wheat there. So then what we did is we mapped it across the United States. Because the big question is, there's something going on environmentally, right? It's always a combination of genetics and environments. Something in our environment has changed, and kids are developing more food allergies. So let's look at the country. So we mapped these 40,000 kids across the U.S., and this is what the map ended up looking like. So the lighter colors are less food allergy, the darker colors are more food allergy. So, well, one thing that was interesting is there's all these theories. So there's the vitamin D theory, where a lot of people thought that maybe kids who get more sun exposure may have less food allergy, and we didn't see this. We actually saw the reverse. We saw kind of a north to south decline, or increase. Okay, now when we looked at geographic variability, one thing we really looked at is population density. So we went from urban centers to metro cities to urban outskirts to suburban areas, small towns, and rural areas. What would you call Lake Forest? Maybe a urban outskirt? So you can see how the prevalence of food allergy kind of stepwise decreased as you moved out to rural areas. Now, what was interesting is almost every food, you can see peanut kind of goes down, shellfish, peanut's the highest everywhere except for rural areas where it comes in second. The only food that was consistent was milk. Milk stayed at 1.8, 1.8, 1.4, 1.5. Milk was pretty consistently in the same prevalence no matter where you lived. Now, severity decrease. So if you had a food allergy, you had an equal chance of having a severe life-threatening reaction no matter where you lived. So this was interesting. So there was something about population density and food allergy. And this is after controlling. You might wonder, well, what about disparities, race, economics? It was after controlling for all of that. Okay, here's the noodle. So it's not you, it's your sandwich. Okay. Now we're going to go into the social and emotional impact. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it is important to note that food allergy is different than other chronic conditions of childhood. And one of the big reasons is because food is everywhere. And I am so hungry after your talk. But food is a part of everything we do. It's a part of our society. It's at every child's event. It's in schools, it's in after schools, it's in sporting events. You cannot get away from food. So parents of children with food allergy, it's a lot harder because you're always on alert. There's not a place where you can really let down your guard except for probably in your own home. So what we did to understand the impact was we surveyed caregivers of children with food allergy. And we found what I just said, that caregiver quality of life varied widely. But the one thing that stayed constant was social limitations were a big problem. 1 in 4 parents reported that their child's food allergy caused a strain on their marriage. 40% experienced hostility from other parents when trying to accommodate their child's food allergy. I'm not going to go through all of these for the sake of time, but I do want to just give you some quotes because I do think, hearing these stories and from parents going through this is so critical. So the first one is emotional burden. So these worries are constant. They don't ever go away and can sometimes become so overwhelming that I feel paralyzed with fear. It is a daily struggle to provide a normal life for my son while keeping him safe from the food allergens that are so dangerous for him. And then we had people say positive. Why focus on all these negatives? Food allergies only rule your life if you allow them to. My son leads a perfectly normal life because we don't treat him like he needs to be in a bubble. Right, I'm going to read you just one more, but you can read these on your own. But how do we do this one? He has been to 2 birthday parties in the past week. At one, his right eye got red and swollen. He took Benadryl and was fine. The mom called me. I let him stay because I don't want to make him feel even more different. But I was at home, nervous, car keys in my hand. It made me so sad. We also did a survey of the general public because we wanted to know what people know. Are people aware of food allergy and what it is, and the prevalence and everything that goes along with food allergy. So we did a survey of 2,148 members of the general public. And some of the biggest knowledge gaps we found that I thought were fascinating were that 68% incorrectly thought that there was a daily medicine a child could take every day to prevent their allergies. Now, that shocked me because that makes you understand why people are, why there's so many barriers. Like if you really think your kid could just take a medicine, then why do we need to not bring in peanuts or peanut butter? So, and I think the problem, the misconception is the word allergy, because when we think of environmental allergies, we think, okay, take your Claritin, take your Zyrtec, there's sprays, there's things that you can do to make yourself feel better if you have an environmental allergy. Also, environmental allergies typically are not life-threatening. You get the symptoms of the runny nose, the itchy eyes, but you do not, there's not a chance that you could potentially die from your allergy. So I think the word allergy can often be misleading, and it's important to know when you're talking to people who don't understand this. 51% incorrectly thought that lactose intolerance was the same as a milk allergy. Another problem, foods cause a lot of different things for different people. A lot of people can't tolerate certain foods, and intolerance is when your body does not have the enzyme to digest the food. So a lot of people are lactose intolerant, meaning if you eat the protein, you cannot break it down. So you have to take the enzyme or take something that has that enzyme in it. Food allergy is very different. Food intolerance, so for lactose intolerance, you usually get symptoms that are mostly GI. So it's bloating or upset stomach. For a milk allergy, it's again, IgE, the immune system is attacking it. So your symptoms can be very severe. And by severe symptoms, I mean, oftentimes in food allergy you get hives. You can get skin symptoms, hives and swelling. But you can also get throat closing, trouble breathing, drop in blood pressure, and it can lead to death. Okay, 46% thought there was a cure for food allergy. So that is not here yet, but we're working on it. 44% did not know that avoidance is the only way to prevent a food food allergy reaction. And then what was really interesting is when we asked the general public, like, would you be willing to have, or no, should there be plans in schools to keep children with food allergies safe? 95% of them agreed. But when we asked them if they would be okay not having their child take peanut butter and jelly sandwich to school, 82% disagreed. So after this is the book that we wrote. It's called The Food Allergy Experience. And my co-author is Denise Bunning, who lives here in Lake Forest. And this book was written to try to explain what's real. So what we did, it was after a support group meeting. We went to a support group meeting where I was showing some of the quotes that I showed you, and the parents asked if I could put a book together with facts, with the quotes, and with tips. And from the beginning, diagnosis to treatment, all the way up to life issues, relationships with spouses, with extended family, with friends, to having the child grow up and transitions through life. And so that's what we tried to do with it. Okay, the last research piece that I'm going to go through is the two big things, I think, to really build awareness is to show that how many people have it, and the next thing is how does it affect us financially. So we recently completed an economic impact study where we surveyed 1,600 caregivers of children with food allergy. We wanted to know how much food allergy was costing them. So we went through. So direct medical costs. So this is visits to the pediatrician, the allergist, the pulmonologist, nutrition, alternative providers, ERs, and hospitalizations. And the total for this was $4.3 billion in the U.S., or $724 per child. This is a lot of money. And this is the amount that typically can be covered by insurance. So that number we thought was high. But then when we went on, we found this is lost productivity. This number is not terribly high, 0.7 billion, but this is just the time it takes a parent to take their child to all these visits. We continued. We asked about out-of-pocket costs. What do you spend on your child because of their food allergy? And the number one thing here, which was interesting, was special diets and allergen-free foods. So that was 1.6 billion alone, which seems like a lot of money, but if you look at it, annual cost per child, it was only $285. I personally have a daughter with food allergy now, and we spend more than that at Whole Foods almost weekly. So it is expensive because you are trying to get food that you know is allergen-free and is safe for your child. Other things are changes in schools. You need to have a safe place where the child can go to school, medications, etc. And the total for this ended up being $5.5 billion, so more than even direct medical costs. Finally, we looked at opportunity costs, and this, as you can see, was the largest, $14.2 billion. And what this is that anxiety that I talked about. Parents, and especially mothers, had to either restrict their job, give up a job, they lost their job because they needed to be around their child. They needed to make sure they were close and local and could help keep their child safe. So labor out of the workforce. And then we asked them, what would you be willing to pay if you could get rid of this food allergy? What would a parent be willing to pay? And what was so fascinating was that the willingness to pay number was 20.8 billion total. And then the costs by families that I talked about, that opportunity cost, the out-of-pocket cost, the losing job cost was 20.5 billion. So indirectly, they pretty much picked the same number that they were already paying out of pocket. So the total cost in the U.S. was $24.8 billion for food allergy, which is a ton of money. Okay, now what about organic peanut butter? It's a slightly more expensive risk of anaphylaxis. And just so you all know what anaphylaxis is, it is a term for a life-threatening food allergic reaction. So it's that trouble breathing, it's that throat closing, it's the drop in blood pressure, it's all those symptoms that are leading to potential life-threatening reaction. And I don't talk about this here, but just so you know, just because this is what I do, if you think a child is having one of those reactions, they need their epinephrine auto-injector immediately. And I just need to make sure that all children with food allergies should carry one. Okay, now the GMOs. So, the debate. So I've heard, I've listened, and I've been aware of some of the research going on in this, because like I told you, when people say, why? This is a question I get every time I go to talk. The prevalence study, after that came out, it was on every nightly news. It was on Colbert, which I was very proud of. And it made it everywhere. It made it to the news, which was great because there was a lot of awareness. But every time I went anywhere to talk to anyone, that was the only question they were interested in, is why are you seeing such an increase? So one big area of interest is the hygiene hypothesis. It's this, we're too clean in our society, and then our children are not exposed to the same things they were exposed to years ago, and they have nothing to fight, so they're starting to fight food. So there's this whole theory around hygiene. The other theory, of course, is what are we eating? What is in our foods now that wasn't there 50 years ago? Whether that be GMOs, whether that be pesticides, or the processing of foods. So I'm going to give you just a cursory look at what I found that's going on. So food allergies have increased dramatically over the past 2 decades. Prevalence has increased by 18% in the last decade alone. Genetically modified foods have also become common around the same time period. I think the first one was 1994 when it was introduced. Did GMOs cause the rise in food allergies, or is it just coincidence? That's our big question. So these are arguments against GMOs, or actually I should say they're saying that GMOs are the cause. So genetic engineering can affect the expression of hundreds of genes that scientists did not intend to affect, potentially resulting in increased levels of an existing allergen, producing a known allergen that was not originally in the non-GMO, or producing a completely new unknown allergen. This commission that's sponsored by the Food Allergy Organization and the World Health Organization and the European Food Safety Authority recommended assessing the potential allergenicity of the new proteins in GMOs. So soybeans. So in the 1990s, soybeans were modified to contain a gene from the Brazil nut. Okay, blood tests from these tree nut allergic people showed the reactions to the genetically modified soybeans were never, were never put on, Okay, so these were more allergenic, so it never got put on the market, and that was in the New England Journal of Medicine. Levels of a known soy allergen were 27% higher in raw genetically modified soy. Cooking soybeans usually reduce levels. Okay, so levels in cooked genetically modified soy were nearly as high as that in raw genetically modified soy, and was up to 7 times higher than cooked non-genetically modified soy. If that makes any sense, all it's saying is that the level of allergens were significantly higher in this genetically modified soy. So genetically modified soybeans also contain a unique protein not found in non-genetically modified soybeans that reacted with IgE. And IgE is that immune piece that attacks, or that's responsible for the allergic reaction. So basically it's saying something's going on with this genetically modified soybean where the allergenicity is higher, and there's new proteins that are also highly allergenic that were not in non-genetically modified soy. Okay, now I gotta give you the arguments on the other side. So these are, no, it's not involved. So the increase in food allergies actually began a little bit before the introduction of GMOs. It's a weak argument because it's not exact. The type of food allergies that have increased most are peanut, tree nut, egg, and milk, foods that are not common for genetically modified organisms. The primary GMOs in the US are soy, corn, canola, and cotton. Of those, only soy is among the top 8. Now, I wrote this, but then I started thinking about all the genetically modified foods that the animals that are producing eggs are eating. So I'm not sure how strongly I can feel about this, especially after the talk. I'm like, oh my gosh, the cows make milk, and the cows are being fed this. But that is one of their arguments. I'm putting it out there. So the conclusion, to date, there is not enough conclusive evidence from human studies to associate GMOs with the increase in food allergies. And I know research is always needed, but it's so difficult to really conclude one way or the other about the issue of GMOs with specifically food allergies, but any disease without enough evidence, speaking as a scientist. Okay, so pesticides. I'm going to just talk a little bit about this because I was just looking at all the food. So dichlorophenols are designed to kill microbes and may inhibit the normal development of microbes in the gut. And this goes to the hygiene hypothesis, the one that I was talking about, that we're becoming too clean. So according to the hygiene hypothesis, food allergy is due to a disruption in the normal development of our gut microbes. A new study suggests that a class of chemicals called dichlorophenols and common pesticides are associated with food sensitization. So this potentially is reducing the good flora in our gut and therefore encouraging food allergies. So people with the highest level of dichlorophenol in their urine were 80% more likely to be sensitized to a food allergy. The results of this new study suggest that an increase in environmental pollution and food allergy may be linked. Okay, so what do we need to do? So why is there an increase in food allergy? That's my number one question. And is it GMOs? Is it pesticides? Is it hygiene? Are they all linked in some way? We are doing some work at Northwestern around this. We have data from that study that was done at Lord Children's of parents and children. We have their blood, we have their skin tests, and we have survey data. And so we know some of the hygiene questions. You know, were they born C-section? Did they get infections in their first year of life? What was their child care situation? Do they have pets? A lot of these things that are linked to potential hygiene. GMOs we have not had an opportunity to look at, but I think is a fascinating area. And then we're doing a lot around improving management of food allergy in schools, in restaurants, with physicians, and much, much more. And I just want, let me see if that's our, oh, this is our dream. So I'm going to end with our dream. It's an adult talking to a kid. When I was your age, there were no food allergies. How many times do I hear that? When we were young, this didn't exist. Everybody took a PB&J to school. And someday, hopefully in a generation when this kid grows up, when I was your age, there were food allergies. So that is definitely our goal. And I have a wonderful team at Northwestern and everywhere actually that I'd like to thank. And just on that, you know, as research is so critical and it's so important to really understand these linkages and how they work. And I completely agree. Anytime you change something, you know, you don't know the farmers or, you know, the growers, they weren't thinking that this is going to have a negative effect down the road, but for every action, there's got to be a reaction, and so we just need to better understand what that is. And we're doing research at Lorraine and Northwestern, and if any of you are interested, I'm around after to talk to me. My colleague Christine is here too. So please, if you want to get more involved, I'd love to hear your ideas. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, also for a very informative presentation, and thank you for the important work you're doing for all of us. Thank you. If you would like to present some questions to any of our panelists, please raise your hand, and a member of the league will come by with pencil and note card so that you can write down your question, and I will be glad to answer any questions. We do have some hands that I see at this point, so thank you. And then when you're done writing your question, raise your hand once again, and a lead member will come and pick up your question, and somehow it will migrate up here to me. So thank you. I have a couple of questions here just to get us started.
I'll try.
The first one is directed to Mr. Kurtis. What are the Tallgrass protocols for raising beef? How are you able to ensure that the sellers from whom you purchase livestock comply with these certain protocols?
Well, we have no hormones administered, no antibiotics administered, no grain or corn administered, so that makes it pretty easy. They leave it out in the pastures. Now in the winter, when the grass is not growing, they have to have something to eat, so they can eat hay, silage, haylage, which very often I thought the secret weapon was going to be a plastic wrap around the big 2,000-pound bale of hay. It's just a little problematic. And basically, but how do we make sure that they do it? Well, they sign an affidavit that they will. There's a USDA inspection. I won't mislead you that the USDA agents aren't out there in the pastures or even contacting the ranchers. Organic certification is strict. But once it gets through the plant, there are USDA tests there for E. coli and things like that. So basically, that's about it. And of course, we're out certified.
Thank you. Another question, this is for Dr. Gupta. Has eczema in children increased as allergies have?
Yes, absolutely. We see a lot more eczema. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure the prevalence is steadily rising similar to as our environmental allergies. And asthma's been steady, but it's at a very high level.
And a follow-up to that is, could our food additives and GMOs also be the culprit in autoimmune diseases such as type 1 diabetes, lupus, various cancers, leukemias?
Yeah, it definitely could. And there are studies starting to look at that. I mean, anything that impacts the immune system, right? All of those that were just mentioned. And foods and pesticides and additives are definitely on the list of potential contributors. It has been looked at. I think there's a lot of research, especially with pesticides, cancer, that's a little bit more solid. But yeah, my answer is yes.
Well, one thing that I've learned, and it's all anecdotal, but it's kind of a common belief that all the corn, with the exception of organic, is now GMO. And the problem is, Monsanto hasn't told us, the government hasn't told us. There's no label. California just went through legislation like that, and I think they're in the middle of it, to have GMO food labeled as such. And when they don't tell you it's GMO, we haven't done the science. You know, the epidemiological studies that are required, science isn't. So that's the scary thing, and that's why Europe is rejected it so strong.
We have a question here. It has been my understanding that farmers and scientists have been cross-pollinating new crops for many years. Is there a difference between cross-pollination and genetic modification of plants?
Well, yes, because those cross-pollinating, Luther Burbank et al., usually came from the same species or family. GMOs are taking genes from different species, and they will mix a jellyfish gene or a gene from a fish that can withstand very low temperatures with, let's say, a variety of corn, so that they can resist certain pests or drought resistant, things like that. Now, on the one hand, it's scientific miracle. On the other, we're doing it without a lot of stuff.
The purpose of doing it was to make them stronger, right? So you're extracting DNA exactly, and you're injecting it into something that may be completely different, but that has that strong, whether it's to resist, what was it, to resist like the weed killers that are herbicides?
Roundup.
Yeah, Roundup. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Another question is, what major crops in our marketplace currently are being genetically modified, and when and by whom?
Well, corn, soy, ostensibly to improve those crops, and primarily on cattle, but the others are in with them. But it's the leader.
Advocates for GMO foods feel that food safety has not been compromised by genetic modification. What independent tests have been done to verify the safety for human health of genetically modified crops? For example, what steps, if any, have been taken to prevent the introduction of allergens or toxins into genetically modified food that could adversely affect individuals? So, have we really done anything on a national scale? I think it goes to whether we have labeling or whether we even know if we're purchasing genetically modified.
And so there's the labeling laws, as Bill said, are not happening, because I think they're fighting it hard, and they feel that why label something if it's not dangerous, right? So currently, genetically modified foods have not been shown to be dangerous or proven in humans. Now, I know there's studies that have been done in mice, especially in France, that showed that it ended up killing off those mice due to cancer specifically. However, there was a lot of controversy over that particular study, because of the way it was done. It was sponsored by a company that makes natural foods, and it was going up against the company that makes GMOs. But I think France is one of the countries that currently bans GMOs.
You know, it's a battleground, and it's like the 60s all over again, and there are not a lot of answers. You've got to come down on one side or another.
It's tough to study it in humans, right? A long-term study of GMOs. I mean, how do you really accurately study that, right? Feed some people genetically modified foods and others not. You know, it's a difficult thing, and you have to look at everything else in their environment. So it's a difficult study to undertake in humans over a long period of time. Currently, I don't know of any real patents.
For Mr. Kurtis, what are the differences between grass-fed and grass-finished beef? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of each method?
Well, there should be no difference. But grass-finished means that they've been fed only grass all the way through to harvest. There are many, corn is in the feedlot. An animal will, at 400 pounds, which is about a year after it is weaned, be sold to a feedlot. And for the next 6 months, it will be fattened with feed. So at 16 months, it will be harvested. It takes 24 months for the grass-fed animal to develop the same kind of marbling and intramuscular fat for harvest. The interesting thing is that that's where our good stuff is. The omega-3 essential fatty acids are in the fat of the grass-fed animal. So, and there are CMAs and a lot of other advantages. So the difference there are a lot of people who will say, well, we're grass-fed, because for the first year, all animals eat grass and milk from the mama. But so you have to be careful in buying something, you know, be sure to look for the grass-finished too.
And while we're on the topic of beef, the question is beef in Australia and Brazil and certain other countries also from corn-fed cattle, or are there countries where most of their cattle are raised on grass? And if so, do these countries have citizens who tend to be less obese? Are you aware?
Yes.
Yes.
You know, only where they have entered into a westernized diet do they become obese. The rest of the world is grass-fed. That's the natural evolution of cattle and how you raise them. We have all the corn in the world. That's the only reason that we're corn-fed. Now, in order to meet our enormous market, which is more richer than the rest of the world, there are feedlots now being built in Brazil, Argentina, and Australia. Cargill is there very heavily, so they will feed their corn-fed market here, which is a shame because they have some of the greatest cattle in the world and grass. So.
For Dr. Gupta, I think this is the question on a lot of people's minds. As there is no cure for a food allergy, have there been studies conducted on how to minimize the effects with diet? The effects of an allergy if you have an allergy, how can you minimize the impact of that allergy? Is there a way to, other than obviously eliminating it, but I think if there are environmental allergies, can we sort of boost the immune system to counteract some of this?
So current research that's going on in finding a cure, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in the field of food allergy. I don't know if you've heard, there's a couple studies that are enrolling at Children's looking at the whole immunotherapy, and so it's introducing small amounts of the food over time and having your immune system get used to it. So that's probably the most promising currently, where you introduce just a micro amount of a peanut, and then you slowly increase it. And it's being done orally, it's being done sublingually under the tongue, it's being done through a patch that you wear that slowly introduces it. So that's probably the most promising cure that we're looking at right now. In terms of modifying food, what's interesting is, if you look around the country, peanuts specifically, kids who live, there was a great study done between here and but basically it showed that the way we roast our peanuts and the age at which we introduce our peanuts may be causing an increase in the allergy compared to, I want to say Jerusalem, where they showed that kids were introduced to some peanut product very, very early age. And they had a much lower chance of having a peanut allergy. So it is interesting. And then there's this whole question about boiling the peanuts versus roasting the peanuts. So there are, in terms of how we eat our food, or what's different about the way we eat our food compared to other countries, there is research going on, and it is showing it. And here we used to say don't feed kids peanuts until they're at least 2 or 3. And one of the reasons was a choking hazard, but then don't even feed them peanut butter because of this fear of having an allergy. Now there's studies showing that maybe we do need to introduce it at an earlier age to get their immune system used to it, and then they will not develop an allergy. So unfortunately, it's so confusing because this has just shot up really recently, but all of those different factors are being looked at and do show confusion. How are we eating our foods, and at what age are we introducing our foods, and what can we be putting in our foods, or that may be increasing the allergenicity, like what was shown with soybean. I mean, that was an exact example. The genetically modified soybean was more allergenic and had proteins that were more allergenic. So it just needs to be studied, which it is.
This is for both of our speakers. I think it's from the geographic charts that Mr. Kurtis showed. They're very interesting. Those living on your Kansas farm, were they to live there, are less likely to have allergies than those in a big city. Are there any ideas why that is? I mean, why the large metropolitan areas are developing more food allergies? And also the questioner noted that the southern states seem to have a much higher percentage as well. So what's going on?
So it could all go along, right? So if you live in a large metropolitan city, chances are you eat out. You rely a lot more on outside food. You're not growing it in your backyard or going to local farmers. So all of that could be part of it. Also, the hygiene hypothesis could also be a part of that in terms of, kids are staying indoors more, not running around outside more. The rural areas were very low. Rural areas, meaning kids who may be growing up on farms, also have been shown to have a lower chance of developing atopy, the whole eczema, allergies, and asthma. And it's been shown, if you grow up near farm animals or with multiple pets, you have a lower chance. So it could be the hygiene that those kids are exposed to the outdoors, to natural environments, just like the cats. Like not living inside in a big city is probably not as natural for us, and it's kind of the way we've started living. Not with a lot of green and grass. I live in Chicago, so that's how my kids are being raised, unfortunately. But yeah, all of that. The metropolitan lifestyle is very different than the way life used to be, I guess. With all of those factors included. So not only the way we eat, but also just the way we live in our country.
One would think that the pastoral life is the better life. It's clean, you're outdoors all the time. But there are studies showing that there are so many chemicals that are being used by farmers that they actually run a high risk of cancer in many cases. You have the ammonium nitrates that you saw. You have pesticides. You have herbicides. Those herbicides have ingredients in there that made Agent Orange, foliage. I sprayed it with my dad in Kansas. And not the concentrations that were used in Vietnam, but it's 2,4-D, 2,4-T, including dioxins, poisonous substance made by man. So it's not all sweet stuff. Pansies out there.
Is there any evidence that the increase in pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, etc., is also, and this could maybe go to the lifestyle question as well, is causing behavioral changes in humans, such as more aggression, more behavior issues, more depression, other behavioral issues that we're seeing an increase in?
Yeah, so all of that is increasing as well, right? So the ADHD, aggressive behaviors, depression, and the problem is absolutely, I think it could be related to some extent, and it has been shown to certain food additives for children. But I think one of the hardest things we always face is there's so many factors that are changing in our lives, right? The level of stress we have, how formulated we are, and how we try to teach kids, and so there's a lot of factors. But to the foods, there have been certain additives in foods that have been shown to increase aggression and to decrease attention, and that is occurring. I don't know about genetically modified foods specifically, but I do know that's been happening with additives.
Can you name some of those additives for us?
You would have to give me a minute. I want to get them right, so I can find them.
Well, without the specific chemicals, we're over-salted, over-sugared, over-processed, and so many of. So on the one hand, we're taking nutrition out, and we've then fortified vitamins, which means we're putting them back in, so that the organic food is really hard to come by. But there are some doctors who say, just go buy all organic food. There's a lot of data that you should go Google, especially ADHD. And those parents that have taken their children off sugary drinks, and Frank, I'll pitch grass-fed beef, and put them on grass-fed beef. I have great stories to tell.
How about autism? Have there been any links with that? That direct study?
It's anecdotal. We don't use it, but people come to us all the time.
There's a lot with gluten, right? Like so, the gluten diets have become a bit popular here. We take their children off, and that's been showing some promise in terms of behavioral issues as well. So definitely, food is linked with everything, like I said, but exactly what is what we're trying to do.
We're basically a seasonal product, like wine, because when the grass isn't growing in the Midwest, the United States, we have to go to where the grass is growing to find the cattle there. Down in South America, why is there summer when we're in winter? But we and our customers, we can skip some days or really get short on our supply over at Sunsets, and boy, we hear about it because they depend on it for their health, and it's almost like a medicine for them. So, and we've had a week, I think, or a couple of weeks where we haven't had a good supply.
The audience, I'm sure, would be interested in if once again you would repeat the name of the book you referred to as a must-read in your presentation.
Michael Pollan, P-O-L-L-A-N, Omnivore's Dilemma. The Omnivore's Dilemma. It is Bible.
Thank you. And then what can we as consumers do to show our discontent with GMOs in the food chain? Who would we direct our concerns to?
Well, first of all, Google it, and you'll find the whole movement. That is, and there are organizations that have grown up just for this. A lot of data. We all have to be smart these days because anybody can come up with science. I'm not. There's a place called Nation of Change that grew out of the Occupy movement. I get their daily newsletter, but I would just try my something from
Yeah, I mean, I would think your mind back on what you think of it first, like by looking around and looking at the work that's been done on both sides. I think, I heard this on the news, but like what you can do is, we all need at least 3 times a day and whatever you buy, if everyone starts buying, and you vote also with your pocketbook and you vote 3 times a day. And so if you eat non-genetically modified food, you are making a statement. We all try to encourage that. And also talk to your congressmen, senators, aldermen. We need to get labeling laws. If you want to know, because the problem is it's so difficult to even know what's genetically, like you said, all corn is genetically modified. Who knew? I didn't know that. So like if we don't see it, some foods actually say, the ones that don't contain it, label it. But, and the ones that don't contain corn syrup, like the high fructose corn syrup sometimes say it. But the things that do, you have to pay close attention. Like, I don't even know how to use them. So, encouraging labeling. I think labeling is a good thing. They label now for food allergy, which has its pluses and minuses. But at least you know. At least you are familiar with what's going on. So I think that would be the first thing to go to try to push that, because I know the movement's not getting it labeling.
And another questioner said, are our universities and farm bureaus working with local farmers to encourage non-GMO products and encouraging them to be raised that way? A lot of great movements have come out of universities and such. And are they seizing on this? Is a movement beginning to form on any of our campuses?
Well,
to that effect?
It's beginning to form, but it comes from the bottom up, from the students. The large corn companies and the chemical companies and the pharmaceutical companies have their names on the buildings. And they pay for our agricultural education. So the science, both in cattle and in corn, is to promote the continued use of corn. And that corn is GMO corn, as it is distributed by Monsanto.
Interesting comment.
So,
and in terms of research, and the problem is NIH does not typically sponsor research in specifically this area. It's usually disease specific, so you have to say, I want to study the effectiveness on something. And NIH money is decreasing rapidly. So it's like, if we cannot research it effectively, and who's paying for a lot of the other research? It's the companies, that produce either one way or the other. I know at Monsanto, they do their own research showing that it's safe, right? So, and that's like any company, of course, that's, what the outcome should be. And when that other study was done, there was so much controversy because it was, a natural food versus GMO, and so it pretty much got taken off and nobody paid attention to it. So, I think having non-partisan groups like the NIH fund studies like this, we should all push, because they government agency, and to get them to focus on a specific area. They'll focus on whatever the people don't want to focus on.
it's very difficult to break in to the establishment. And I run right up against that. You find it interesting because it'll make a tea party out of it. We're going along, and we harvest about 2,000 head of cattle a year. That's against 2 million head that a cargill will harvest. So we're obviously small players, but we're trying to do it grass-fed and healthy, or organic, if you will. In 1921, a law was passed when we were just growing in the stockyards, and after Upton Sinclair had done his investigative reporting and wrote The Jungle, to favor, it's called the Packers and Stockers law, favor ranchers who came to Chicago, got lost in the mix, and weren't getting paid over time. So the law says that they have to be paid in some cases 24 hours. Others are 7 days, and some are 14 days. That means that you have to pay for all those little cuts of meat that come out of a processor before you sell it. Very difficult financial model. I'm a packer because technically I harvest cattle. So there is an exception, and that is that you can enter into a contract with the individual producer or rancher to say, well, he agrees to take longer, 30 days, 60 days to pay. And it's almost a religion with these ranchers because they believe so strongly in what we're doing, because we're trying to create a market that can compete against the big boys and all the problems that we solve. Well, there was a complaint that leveled against me as being in violation of this law. So in come the agents from the USDA, a little bureaucracy with a larger bureaucracy, whose job it is to run on this law. They don't get very many complaints. Without a search warrant, without a charge, without an explanation or a phone call, show up at the office and begin going through our books and say, well, you haven't been paying the producers on time. I said, well, they're all under contract. So they took the contract back to their office and they read it and they said, well, you know, it doesn't have this sentence in it. So you're going to have to redo all the contracts, enter into the relationships. We did. And we've been paying off $2 million in the course of regular business. And then we came down, finally, there was, we wanted to settle it, and they wanted to settle it, and we had about 350,000 bills left. And we said, look, fine us, you know, we'll go on. There's nothing criminal, no food safety involved, so they give us a $50,000 fine. And we had to pay, or we'll have to pay $350,000. If I were convicted of murder, probably not Bill Kurtis, but if I were convicted of murder, or if I, you know, committed a crime, there would be no press release that would be released. The reporters would be there, they could, you know, report on it. But there isn't a kind of public relations that makes that office look good. But when I settled, there was a press release that came out listing $1.5 million that we were late in paying, which in fact was part of the regular business that any business would do. And tooting their own horn to justify essentially a job that is totally redundant within the larger, based on the law from 1921. Were they doing it because of what I'm doing? A small company trying to establish an organic that's going against the grain. It's a very difficult job because it's a $400 billion business in the course of this. And nobody screwed around with Mother Nature, as they say. But anyway, so we're back on track, and it was quite an experience to go up against the government.
I think there's another book there.
In the 7 years of this struggle, there's a big one.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, when that paper came out, the prevalence paper, I got a phone call from the peanut farmers of America. And they were not happy with our numbers, you know? And my point to them was, at least in that case, we were on the same team. I don't want people to have peanut allergy, just like they don't want people to have peanut allergy. So it was a very nice conversation in the end, and it worked out. But when you're going up against the big companies, you're going to get pushed back. But I do want to, especially for the students in the audience, encourage it, because you saw what the 15-year-old girl did, right? You can get, now with social media and all, you know, everyone, you know, paying attention, if you do find something like she did at Gatorade, and you take it to the next level, and you fight for it, and you push the company and put it out there in social media, people will pay attention. So I don't want anyone to think, oh yeah, there's nothing we can do. You feel strongly about it.
It's the pressure of the people. Pepsi has, I think, eliminated high fructose corn syrup. Starbucks has eliminated. Campbell's has reduced the level of salt in its food. They are listening, and they know that our food will have to evolve. So the big guys want to please the customer. Keep that in mind and be vocal and complain, because a single lemon, look at a 15-year-old girl, for God's sake, you know, can have it.
That's very interesting. That answers a lot of questions from our audience to what can be done to change what we've been talking about today. And you've also hit on the economics of the issue, you know, in terms of the big guys fighting you, but there's a question here that says, you know, if you go to the grocery store, often you are paying more for organic products, for non-GMO products, for your grass-fed beef. So, you know, how do we get to the point where it's truly affordable for the consumer, where we're not paying a premium for these products? And why are we paying a premium for them? Is it cheaper to use all of these other things?
Well, corn, farmers paid 25% of the crop to plant corn. When he says, I'm going to go in and I'm going to plant 150 acres of corn, he goes to the extension office and he has given money on the table. It's called a direct subsidy. He can go out, he can get his fertilizer, he can buy his seed corn, and he plants it. Then, if the harvest you know, does not exceed production costs, he will be paid crop insurance. So now in the drought, somebody asked the governor of Iowa, oh God, we're so sorry you're having such a tough time. He said, no, we're not. Life is great. You're being paid on both ends. And crop insurance is keeping us. So watch the farm bill, because they're going to reduce subsidies, direct subsidies, and that's great. But they're going to increase the crop insurance. So it's about, look, we all love farmers. We all want to keep eating. They're one of the strongest lobbies. But even they, every president has had it on the books to reduce subsidies all the way back to Eisenhower, because they see what has happened. And, as you saw, most of the subsidies go to the larger corporations who are already making money on the crops. They take their subsidy money and buy out the smaller farmers. Unintended consequences. That's it.
Mr. Kurtis, we do want someone, we have someone in the audience who wonders why you're not raising buffalo.
I have 60 buffalo on my ranch. The problem is you can drive the pickup in, but you can't get out of the pickup. So they're a wild animal. They're beautiful, wonderful animals. But when they want to roam, they'll go through. I swear to God, they'll go through a brick wall. They're always in the break, and they're young males. Young males, anywhere, any species, are always a problem. The other day, my ranch manager said, hey, the buffalo are out. They got they're 5 miles away. It was, I guess, migration time. And I said, well, which ones? He said, well, the young guys. You know, the old guys are too old to make it through. They went through 4 fences. So he said, okay, I'll get them the next day. So he goes over there, and they're not there. They're back. They're back with the mamas and the females. Why? Because they're a herd animal. They are families, and they like each other. They all have their babies in the blizzard. You don't have to worry about them at all. They eat grass and only grass. And the market is improving. 10 Turner has most of the buffalo in the country, about 270,000 now. But he's got the same problem I do. You have to create the market and the supply at the same time. And it's a good state. Some are being fed corn, and that's a shame.
We're about out of time. We promised to get everyone out of here around 5 o'clock. We could go on for a long time. Thank you for being so generous with your time with us today on this Sunday afternoon. Brochures as you leave, and also will your PowerPoints be available to the league to put on their website? Your PowerPoints. Thank you again for everyone.
Yeah, I'll meet.